All right, welcome back. And this is Daybreak. In case you're just joining us today, it's all about the climate change debate. We know that what is happening is a very important conference happening in Egypt at the coastal city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Of course, it is the 27th climate change conference of parties. Our head of state, William Ruto, is representing the country in this important debate. And of course, we are going to be breaking down some of the issues that are pertinent, but of significance as well is that our very own Jamila Mohammed is also part of those who are following very closely on what deliberations are coming from that end. And yesterday she took part of her time to interact with a 10-year-old girl who is really inspiring, because at her age she has managed to plant over 10,000 trees, and she was accompanied by her mother to this important conference just so that she can share her mind on what is going on in as far as climate change mitigation measures is concerned. Let's get to hear more from that story that was compiled by Jamila Mohammed.
9-year-old Karen Kimani is a delightful sensation here at the ongoing climate change conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. She greets everyone with a smile and is happy to speak and engage with anyone interested in listening to her story. Her mother, Anne Kimani, always a step away, smiling proudly.
Wow.
Among Karen's many admirers is President William Ruto. Meeting the head of state was a dream come true for the 9-year-old climate change activist.
I was so happy and excited to meet him. Like, it was my dream to meet the new president.
Karen is here at the COP27 because of her efforts to plant trees. She was invited to speak during a high-level side event organized by Kenya on forestry and rangelands restoration. And when she got her chance to address the meeting, Karen had some questions for President Ruto.
How are you going to save the wild animals from drought? Thank you.
We are responding to the loss of our wildlife because it has become urgent and necessary, because we have never seen the kind of drought we've seen this year in 40 years. And that has necessitated us to provide resources for making sure that we keep our wildlife alive.
He answered them exactly how I really wanted. I understand the question and I understand what he replied.
Young Karen has planted over 10,000 trees and has over 35,000 tree seedlings at her home in Utawala in Nairobi.
Overgrown ones are really big, and I really want to plant them, and I'm wishing the rain can come.
Like her, she have been trying to plant trees, but eventually they dry.
Her inspiration was Nobel laureate Wangari Maathai, about whom her mother had told her stories. Karen was not even born when the Greenbelt movement activist passed away in 2011.
But when I heard she passed away, I felt so sad, and something told me you should be like her, take the chance. And I took the chance, and here I am, planting trees.
And as she proudly carries the Kenyan flag with her, playing innocently, Karen is aware that her efforts are making a difference. And she is just getting started. Jamila Mohammed, Citizen TV, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
Wow, what an inspiring story there by Jamila Mohammed. Actually, she's only 9, not 10 years. Karen, they are really inspiring us to change our behaviors and to start embracing the new way of life. That is to, just plant more trees. And she has planted 10,000 trees at her age. And she has just gotten started, like Jamila puts it there. And that is going to be forming the basis of our conversation this particular morning. I'm going to be having a panel of 3 experts right here in studio and all the way from Egypt. And I'll begin by just introducing who I have here. Esther Mwiruri. Esther Mwiruri is a programs officer, climate change and adaptation at the Kenya Red Cross. Thank you so much for creating time for us.
Thank you.
All right. And on Zoom, we are joined by 2 doctors, Dr. Kinyanjui Koimburi. He is an agriculture and climate change expert. And of course, on Zoom, we'll also be joined by Dr. Mithika Mwenda. He's the Executive Director, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, as we delve into what has taken shape so far since the commencement of the 27th Climate Change Conference of Parties happening in Egypt. But just to begin straight away with you, Esther, why is this conference important from where you sit?
It's very important because we are currently living the reality of climate change impacts. As everyone is aware, we are in a hunger crisis in the Horn of African region. In Kenya, it's the worst drought in 40 years. We have 4.35 million Kenyans who are going hungry at this particular moment. And it is not an event that has just happened. It is something that has progressively happened over the last 2 years. And apart from the drought situation that we are seeing, we have also experienced in the same period different hazards that are climate related. And just to mention but a few, we have had instances of flash flood and flooding within different parts of this country. You remember in 2018, we had a huge flooding that affected so many families. And these are impacts of extreme weather events that are driven by the changing climate. And part of what we are seeing is that the prediction around the severity and the scale of climate-related hazards is going to increase. So one of the things that we are seeing, and normally previously we were saying that drought and floods are natural hazards. Mm-hmm. We no longer use that term because we realize that the human activities have accelerated the natural processes of how these hazards occur. And this is now a big concern because it is directly linked to the changing climate. And it is because of the different human activities that are people carrying out, increasing the gas emissions and in turn increasing the global warming, which is in an ideal situation a natural process, but because of the over-emitting of the greenhouse gases from our industries, from our different maybe vehicles, factories, and different ways that we are also practicing, for example, unsustainable agricultural practices, deforestation, and degrading our environment. Mm-hmm. All these are in turn accelerating the natural process of global warming, and the impact we are seeing today is a result of that. So this is very important because we need to ensure that we are able to take concrete steps that can help us reverse the different, the various impacts that we are already seeing today. All
right, and I'll come back to you so that even as we continue to look at who now bears the biggest responsibility and the biggest, burden in terms of the impact in this whole equation. But I told you we'll be also crossing over to Egypt to get a feel of what is happening there. And on Zoom, joining us are two doctors, Dr. Kinyanjui Koimburi and Dr. Mithika Mwenda. And just to get your thoughts on this also, Dr. Mwenda, you have been in Egypt to be part of this very important conference that is going to shape the future of the entire globe. Can you tell us from your perspective, why is this significant? Dr. Mwenda, if you can hear me, just want to get your thoughts on
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. All right, maybe just to run you through my question again, you have been in Egypt to follow in the ongoing process of the COP27. Just tell me a bit about why you find this a significant sit-down by several leaders from different countries.
Just, hello, just a moment.
All right, I believe we will be crossing over to... We will be crossing over to Dr. Mwenda in just a bit, but let me, cross over to Dr. Koimburi. Dr. Koimburi is also joining us from Egypt. He is an agriculture and climate change expert. He is currently part of those who are attending and sharing their insights on the climate change debate happening at the COP27. Currently, just, to get your thoughts as well, Dr. Koimburi, if you can hear me, a very good morning to you. Kindly just tell us a bit about some of the things that you find significant with regards to this conference. Dr. Koimburi, if you can hear me.
Thank you so much. Right. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Dr. Koimburi, you're clear. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there's a small lag on the sound. Yes, thank you so much for having me on this show. There is a small sound lag for both of us.
All right. Apologies for that. Of course, we are going to be fixing that small hitch we are facing there, connecting with our experts this morning from Egypt, because it's really important that we also get their insights on the discussion that we have in studio this morning as we talk about the climate change debate. And of course, in studio, I'm also having a sit down with Esther Mwiruri. Esther is a programs officer, climate change and adaptation Kenya at the Kenya Red Cross. And I just want to get your insights on, where we are as a country. Yesterday, President William Ruto, during an interview, said that actually we are at a point where we are shifting our financing for critical sectors such as education and health to feed the hungry population in our country. Is the situation that bad? Just paint a picture for us on what we are looking at.
Yes, and just to reference on some of the important discussions that need to happen and now at the COP27 is the fact that we are seeing how devastation of climate-related impacts are affecting people, but also affecting governments and forcing governments to rebudget their development funds and channel them towards response and emergency support. And one of the things that have been part of discussions is whether we will have a global commitment towards loss and damage, because there are communities and there are areas in this planet where they are beyond the adaptation window and they need help to build resilience and to cope with the shocks of climate change. And this is an important discussion that needs to be given priority during this COP on how are we going to, the government at the global level are going to support different countries that are very vulnerable and different communities that are very vulnerable to actually be able to respond and cope with the shocks. But also some of the questions around that particular debate are who are going to pay and who is going to be the ultimate recipient, and how do you determine who has suffered loss and damage. Those are some of the important threshold discussions that need to be agreed and arrived at. But also, how do we ensure that words are matched by commitment? Because what we have seen is even with the Adaptation Fund, the world nations had committed over the Paris Agreement to be raising $100 billion to support the vulnerable developing countries to cope with climate change impact. And we still haven't seen that. And even from, for example, the Red Cross, the IFRC analysis of recipients of the Adaptation Fund, the top 30 vulnerable countries in the world to climate-related hazards do not get less than 30 per capita adaptation fund. So what we are saying is that part of this conversation is how do we put the most vulnerable communities' interest at the center of these discussions. And this will go towards improving the systems that are there, but also being able to create different mechanisms that address vulnerability at the local level.
Let me just take you back to something you said about the commitment by developed countries to support developing nations in mitigating the impact of climate change. A commitment that saw them, I beg your pardon, that saw them say that they will contribute $100 billion a year to help in this, but that has not been met. In fact, in 2019, they only contributed about $80 billion. And that has been the trend over time. I can't remember the year when they met that particular threshold. Did we then set the goal too high, or there's just no goodwill to fulfill that obligation?
Yeah, I don't think the goal is too high, because clearly we can see the cost of inaction. And what we are seeing today is the impact of drought, for example, in the Horn of Africa and in Kenya in particular, is a culmination of several factors, because we have been talking about climate change issues for several years now, and we know we have had windows of opportunities to actually mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change. So for me, I feel it's more about the commitment to what we are able to set, because even the 100 billion, we should also see a commitment towards increasing that, and not necessarily saying the goal is too high, and that's why we are not able to meet. But also to say, during the last COP26 meeting under the presidency of the United Kingdom, there was the presidency did an analysis to determine whether actually the wealthy nations are able to meet the 100 billion. Yeah. And the analysis was, yes, they are able to do that. So I think it's more about the commitment part and not the fact that the goal is too high.
Mm-hmm. But you know, there's a lot that is happening in the country right now. I mean, every country in the entire globe has been hit by the economic crisis that we are all experiencing. I'm curious to know how sustainable that is. You remember COVID happened. Right now we have the Russia-Ukraine war that has affected so many countries. And how sustainable is this kind of a collaboration?
Okay, so let me say that from the Red Cross, we work with communities throughout the disaster management cycle. So we are able to work with them to mitigate and to prevent the adverse impacts of climate-related hazards. And some of these facilities, like the Adaptation Fund and the Adaptation Window, can help really communities build resilience towards anticipated climate crisis or anticipated climate-related hazards. Hazards don't necessarily have to cause damage or they have to become disasters. We just need to ensure that we have systems in place that can be able to support community action to build their resilience towards that. So I think in as far as we are now seeing a lot of different factors that are making even the situation of climate crisis even difficult. I think there are opportunities to actually build resilience, and this is towards first of all being able to adopt proactive measures within our different sectors, so that we are not waiting too late to react to the impacts that we are already seeing, but we are in a proactive way that we can be able to put in structures if it's an enabling policy environment that can enable certain actions to be taken in place and mitigate some of the climate-related impacts that we are seeing. But we are also able to support community action and local-led action towards mitigation impact. And I'll give you an example. Right now, it is very clear that there's a clear direct connection or relation between environmental restoration and climate change. So we just need to make and take deliberate actions that we can be able to restore our degraded forest, restore our river basins, and be able to adopt to more sustainable farming practices. But above that, we need to adopt more green economy and sustainable way of producing goods and services by reducing adopting much more cleaner energy so that we can reduce the emissions. For Kenya, for example, and for African nations, we are our priority is adaptation because we do not emit as much as the wealthy nations. However, we are suffering the most consequences. So at this critical moment, the adaptation is one of the windows of opportunities that will ensure that we don't tap into. Yeah, we don't slip into the worst situation here.
All right, and we'll talk more about that as we continue with this conversation. I just want us to quickly cross over back to Dr. Kinyanjui Koimburi. He is an agriculture and climate change expert. He is coming to us live via Zoom from Egypt. And I just want to hear from you, Daktari. You have been part of the few days that the conference has been going on. Kindly tell us a bit about what you've been able to gather. Why is this important? Why should we, as a country, really focus on having our voice heard at this crucial meeting?
Can you hear me well from the studio?
Yes, I can.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. And right here at the COP27 where we are with Dr. Mithika, we are actually part of the delegation that is coming from Kenya and the many African leaders who are at the COP, with a view of actually trying to see how best Kenya can be put in the limelight. What do I mean by this? I mean in terms of Africa being able to access the climate finance, because we have seen that Africa has been having issues when it comes to adaptation and mitigation. And this is a backdrop from COP21, which happened in 2015, and also last year, the one that happened in Glasgow, because we have seen the developed nations have not been fulfilling their pledges. That is in terms of climate finance. They have not been feeding into the pledges of the money that is $100 billion US. So what we are calling for is the clarion call for them to actually reach up to the expectations and give us the money so that we can be able to climate-proof ourselves moving forward. Back to you.
All right. I'll be coming back to you in a bit just to understand why you think it has been difficult for the developed countries to meet their obligations in terms of their commitment to contribute $100 billion US to developing countries annually. But that will come later, even as we continue to seek a connection with Dr. Mithika Mwendwa, the Executive Director of Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, who is also going to be coming to us live from Egypt. But for now, we take a very short break right here on Daybreak. Do stay with us. The conversation continues shortly.